Today's daf is daf Yutes. The Gemara says, Tana, we have a brisa, Lilamdo Chafina, that the Kohen Gadol goes into the Lishkas of Tinus, base of Tinus. This was a special family that were the experts in manufacturing the Ketores and in teaching the Kohen Gadol how to do the avoda, the very complicated, challenging avoda of the Ketores lifnai v'lifnim. Omer Rav Papa, they l'shakos hayulo l'Kohen Gadol. Achas lishkas farhedrin v'achas lishkas base of Tinus. There were two chambers that were dedicated to the Kohen Gadol. And during the 7 days of quarantine of Prisha, he used one chamber to learn how to do the Avodas HaKtoras, and another chamber he went back to sleep at night. And achas b'tzafon v'achas b'daron. We're going to see, based on Mishnayos in Masechet Midos, that these two chambers were located at different ends of the Azor, one on the south, one on the north. And the entire sugya that we're going to study today of Rav Papa is Rav Papa is going to try to figure out which of these two chambers was on the south and which was on the north. And at the end of this discussion, if we have time, we'll raise the question why they couldn't combine these two chambers or put them one next to the other. But in any event, the premise is that one of these chambers, maybe it was the Avtinus was on the south, and the Lishkas Farhedrin, where the Kohen Gadol slept, was on the north, or vice versa. We don't know. And Rav Papa is going to try to do a brilliant analysis to calculate where these two chambers were located, which one was on the south, which one was on the north. So starting with the Mishnah in Midos. Achas bat Sofon, we're going to indicate that one of these two lishakos, of these two chambers, was in the north. Disnan sheish lishakos hayu ba'azara. There were all told 6 different lishakos that were located within the complex called the Azara. Sholosh betzofim v'sholosh bedorim. Shebadorim, what were the 3 lishakos that were located in the southern part of the Azara? But keep in mind that north is to the right, south is to the left, forward is to the west. And on the Durham side, we have Lishkas HaMelach, which we'll see in a second what each of these Lishakos function, Lishkas HaParva, and Lishkas HaMadichin. Lishkas HaMelach, Shesham HaYunotzin Melech L'Karban. That's where they stored the salt. The Torah says, Kol Karbanecha Tochal Melech, and there's a requirement to put salt on each carbon. Lishkas HaParva, Sham Hayu Molchim Oros Kodjim. So there was a process of taking the hides of the karbonos, and they would do malicha. They would add salt, and as a result, they needed a chamber, a lishka, where they could store the salt, and they dedicated a lishka called the Lishkas HaParva. Now, the Lishkas HaParva is more famous for its roof than for the actual chamber, because salting the carbon and storing the salt for the carbon, okay, that's important. I'm not saying no. But what's more important is that Al-Gaga, on the roof of the Lishkas HaParva, we must keep in mind that the Lishkas HaParva is located in the Azara. Haisa based Tvila LeKohen Gadol b'Yom Kippurim. On Yom Kippur, as we know, Yom Kippur the Kohen Gadol had to be tovel no less than 5 times. 4 out of those 5 times, with the exception of the first Tvila, were Bakodesh, meaning within the Azara. And where was the Beis HaTvila for the Kohen Gadol to be tovel? It was located on the Gag of the Beis HaParva. Now, keep in mind that the Beis HaParva was subterranean; it was below ground level. And the roof of the Beis HaParva was equal to ground level. And therefore, it had the sanctity of the Azara. And since the Torah says, with regard to Kiddush in a mikvah, that the Kohen Gadol has to undergo this process of Kiddush, Bakodesh, the Torah says, therefore, you would have to go to the Beis HaTfilah that was located on the Gag of the Lishkas HaParva. Finally, we get to the third Lishko that was in the southern part of the Azara, and that's Lishkas HaMadichim, Sham HaYumadichim Kirvei Kodshim. There were the insides of the animal that was full of refuse, and we had to remove that, and that was a process called Hadocha, and they had a special chamber where they would send the carbon for Hadocha purposes. And again, we should keep in mind that Hadocha does not require a Kohen. It is not an avoda. Even a zar would be kosher for Hadocha. And it was done in a chamber that was located in the Azara, but yet we would allow a non-Kohen into the Azara for the purpose of preparing the basar and the emurim, faktor al gabi mizbech, because you're not allowed to be makta the emurim without first removing all the despicable refuse that's caught up in the kishkas of the animal. Right? There was a round way of climbing up, legag Beis HaParva. So the Beis HaParva is located immediately to the side of the Lishkas HaMadichim, and for the Kohen Gadol to go up to the gag of the Lishkas HaParva into the Beis HaTfilah 4 times during Yom Kippur, he would climb through this, we'll call it a staircase, that would lead from the Lishkas HaMadichim into the gag and the Beis HaTfilah on top of the Beis HaParva. Now we get to the Safon. We're turning to the right side of the Azara. Keep in mind the Azara was 130 amas square. It was a very long and large section of land. And in the northern side, we have Lishkas HaEitz, Lishkas HaGola, and Lishkas HaGozis. Lishkas HaEitz, Amar Abelazar ben Yaakov, and you may recall that on the previous Amud, we quoted this Mishnah to prove that the Mishnayos in this Masechta are authored by Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. He says, Shachachti my hoisa mishameshes. I needed help. I didn't remember what they did with the Lishkas HaEitz. Apparently, the Ravid says the Lishkas HaEitz was built from wood, but what was its function? Is Abba Shol Omer, I had to ask this question to get guidance from Abba Shol. He revealed that it's a Lishkas Kohen Gadol. It's a chamber for the Kohen Gadol. Now, Lishkas Kohen Gadol means that originally we were talking about 2 lishakos, 2 different chambers. One was Beis Havtinus, one was the Farhedrin, and one of those 2 is located, says Abba Shol, in the northern side of the Azara, and it's called a Lishkas Kohen Gadol. But which one of the 2 is he referring to? That's going to baffle the mind of Rav Papa, as we'll soon see. Now, what this means is that you have kind of like a segel in which you have 2 chambers, and behind those 2 chambers, we will find the location of the Lishkas Kohen Gadol. One of these 2 chambers, that's the Lishkas HaEitz, and the Lishkas HaGola and the Lishkas HaGoz. So the Lishkas HaEitz is now being identified according to Abba Shol as the Lishka of the Kohen Gadol. We're not sure which one, whether it's the Lishkas Farhedrin or the Lishkas Beis Havtinus, but it's located behind 2 Lishakos, and one is called the Lishkas HaGozis, and the other is called the Lishkas HaGola. What is the Lishkas Hagola? Gola means the Ole Hagola. At the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, the Jewish people came on Aliyah from Babylonia in order to build the second Beis Hamikdash. And what did they do? They dug a cistern, Sham Hayabar Gola, Galgal Nasan Olav. There was a wheel that they used to raise the water from the bottom. And Misham Maspikin Mayim L'Kol Azor. They needed water in order to prepare the karbanos, and especially to clean out the basar, and for many other purposes. They added water to various menachos and to lechem, whatever it is. All the water came from this lishka, which is called the Lishkas Hagola, in honor of and recognizing, respecting the Ole Gola that came from Bavel Teretz Yisrael, and they dug this cistern of water. Lishkas Hagazis, gazis means when you take a stone and you cut it in a very sharp and plane it off. That's how you sham, how you sanhedrin shal Yisrael Yosheves vidana es hakohen. That the location of the highest court of 71 elders had to be in the Azara in order that they would supervise the ovdim of the avoda of the karbanos. And every Kohen on the first round of his avoda would have to present his credentials to the Sanhedrin Agdola that sat in the Lishkas Hagazis in the Azara. Mishanim Tzavo Psul. If the Sanhedrin, after investigating the genealogy of this Kohen, they decided as a psul, one of his grandmothers was married after she was divorced to a Kohen, or something of that sort, and then he was in a state of despair. He would put on black clothes and cover his face with a cape, and it was a state of bucha that unfortunately he had to be booted out of the Azara. He could not engage in the avoda. However, is loadim sabopsul, if they gave him the okay, he could serve, and he would wear white clothes that indicate his joy that he has the opportunity to serve in the Mikdash of Hashem. Rav Papa says, Achas Padar. We saw in the Brisa that the Kohen Gadol had a chamber in the south. Wait a second. We just finished saying that the Lishkas HaEtzim, Abba Shol told me, is identified as the chamber of the Kohen Gadol, and that's located in the north. Says Rav Papa, but there's another chamber that's located in the south. How do I know this? Disnan, and once again, we go back to Masechet Midos. Shiva Shi'arim Hayu Bazar. The Azara was surrounded by 7 gates. Shlosha B'Tzofan, Shlosha B'Darim, V'Achas B'Mizrach. Shebadaro, what were the 3 gates on the southern side of the Azara? Number 1, Shar Hadloka. And Shar Hadloka is where they kept the fire, so that just in case there was not enough of a fire on the Maracha, on the Gag HaMizbeach, then they would go into the Shar, through the Shar Hadloka, and they would find Eish. Sheni Lo. And now we're moving always towards the west, towards the Kodesh, Shara Karban. And the Shara Karban was the shar for the Tamid, the carbon that was brought twice daily. And that's where they brought the Tamid through the shar on the southern side of the Azara. Shlishi Lo Shar Mayim. And here we have the Shar HaMayim. That's where on Sukkot, where the mitzvah was, Ushavtem Mayim B'Sason, they would gather water from the Mei Shiloach for the purpose of Nitzuch HaMayim on Sukkot, and they went through a special gate that was very, very close to the Mizbeach. That's where they took the Mayim, and immediately they fulfilled the mitzvah of Nitzuch HaMayim al Gabi Mizbeach on Chag HaSukkos. And all these sha'arim were located in the south. Mizrach. Mizrach means when you enter into the Azara, the main entranceway, that's called Shar Nicanor. The great miracles that took place at the time of Nicanor when he brought those copper gates, those doors. Shtei l'shakos hayusham. When you entered into the Shara Nicanor, if you looked on your right, if you looked on your left, you would see two chambers, one on each side. Achas lishkas Pinchas Hamalavich. Pinchas was the Kohen that was chosen to supervise the Big Day Kahuna, and he would even go as far as helping the Kohanim wear the Big Day Kahuna, putting them on their bodies. And Achas, the other chamber that you encountered on the other side, the left side, when you entered into the Shar HaNicanor, was called the Lishkas Osei Chavitim. Now, the Chavitim were, number one, the daily korban of the Kohen Gadol, and number two, if I'm not mistaken, okay, I have to double check that, we don't have time right now, but that was also the first korban that was brought as a mincha by every Kohen on the first occasion of his avodah. But now there are three gates on the northern side of the Azara. Number one, Shar Nitzotz, and this was a shar that was open on top. It did not have a roof, and therefore it's called Nitzotz. Nitzotz means rays of sun, because there was a great deal of sunlight coming through the open area. And it's called a Binyan Achsadra Hoya. Achsadra is any area, we saw this in Erevin, that has walls but no ceiling. The Aliyah B'nuyalo Al Gabav. And what was the purpose of going through the Shar Nitzotz? It was to climb up to the next level, the Aliyah, and that was a vantage point from which the Kohanim and the Leviim could be shomer. They could make sure that no one enters into the area of the Azara without having the proper credentials and the head to do so. Kohanim shomer milamala, Leviim milamata. And the mitzvah of what's called Mora Migdash, to have an honor and an awe for the Beis HaMikdash, required that we had to have shomrim who would go around the Migdash, not because people would steal, although there were very valuable objects in the Migdash, but the main purpose was because this is the temple of Hashem, and the Melech Malchei Amlochim, no less than any Melech, a human king, has to have guards that surround his palace. We can call it an honor guard, and that had to be taken place, as the Rambam describes it in Hilchas Beis HaBechira, Yilavu Alecha V'Yisharsucha. And although the Kohanim perhaps had the main thrust of this mitzvah of Shmiras Migdash, but the mitzvah of Shmiras Migdash was also incumbent upon the Kohen, on the Leviim, because the Torah says Yilavu Alecha. Now it seems that the Leviim were on ground level. That's a bit of a problem, because why would you need two sets of guards, one on the top level, one on the bottom level? So it could be that the Leviim were actually close to the Kohanim, and they were perhaps not on the top of the Shar HaNitzotz, but on the rampart of the Shar HaNitzotz. And now the Mishnah describes it as Pesach Hoyelo Lechel. Okay, now the Chel is on the Har HaBayis, but it's not sanctified with the kedusha of the Azara. And the Chel was the area that you entered into immediately after you passed through the Soreg, which was a lattice fence that surrounded the Harabayas. And this Shar, which we call the Shar Hanitzots, was opened up Pasach lechel, and it would seem that the Mishnah is emphasizing Pasach lechel to tell you that it doesn't have the status of Azara per se, because to have the sanctity of the Azara, you have to have a Pesach into the Azara, and here the Pesach went into the Chel. Sheni Lo, now we're still in the northern part of the Azara. The second Shar was the Shar Karban. Shlishi was Shar Beis HaMoked. And it's clear that we have here on this list, let's go back for a moment. We have here just 1 second. Oh, that's it. In the previous Mishnah that we saw, there was a shar, a lishka for the Kohen Gadol on the northern side. And in this Mishnah, we see that there was a shar of the Kohen Gadol on the southern side. And how do we see that? Because amongst the three gates on the southern side of the Azara, we have the Shar Hamayim. So really, this whole Mishnah that we're learning, for our purposes, really could be reduced to one, how many words is it? One 4-letter phrase or sentence in the Mishnah, that the Shar Hamayim was on the northern side. I'm sorry, that the Shar Hamayim was on the southern side. And we know that the Lishkas Kohen Gadol was right next to the Shar Hamayim. And the Kohen Gadol would immediately be able to go from his Lishka into the Shar Hamayim to be Tovel. And that's what it says here in the Brisa. Chamesh Tfilos Vasar Kiddushin Tovel Kohen Gadol Mekadosh Bo Bayom Bekulam Kodesh Al Gabi Beis HaParva Chutz Mizu. Only the first Tvila was outside the Kodesh. It was an area that wasn't sanctified. And where was that area? Al Gabi Shar Hamayim. And then the Brisa says Ubitzad Lishkaso Hoisa, to make it easy access for the Kohen Gadol. When he got up in the morning, he would go immediately into the Beis HaTfilah on the Shar Hamayim, and that was in the southern side. Says Rav Papa V'lo Yadana. Notice we see that the Kohen Gadol certainly had a lishka that was bitzad. It was immediately located contiguous to the Shar Hamayim on the south, but I'm not sure in lishkas farhedjin batzofon, for lishkas beis avtinas badorom, or the opposite, lishkas beis avtinas batzofon, lishkas farhedjin badorom. I know that there are two lishakos of the Kohen Gadol, each serving a different function. One is for sleeping and one is for training and learning how to do the avodas haktores. But I'm not sure which of these two lishakos was on the north and which was on the south. However, mistabra, I can determine based on logical analysis that lishkas farhedrin b'daran havi, that the place where the Kohen Gadol would go to sleep was on the south, which would mean that when he woke up in the morning, he was next door to the Shara Mayim, and he could immediately go into the mikvah without having to make any circuitous route around the Azora. And that's the Gemara says, my timer, Makdim, Koi. Makdim means when he rose. Actually, the word Koi means when he rose. But Makdim early, when he rose early, Masechet Raglov, he would usually train his body to go to the bathroom. And after that, he's not allowed to go into the Azora without doing a Tvila. And the mikvah was next door on the Shara Mayim, because now we're saying that the Lishkas Farhedrin was in the south and the Shara Mayim was in the south, so that he was immediately contiguous when he woke up in the morning and he had to go to the mikvah to the Shara Mayim. All this is under the assumption that it's the Lishkas Farhedrin that was in the south. Ozil Itzofon v'Gomer Chafina, on this 7-day quarantine, day after day, he would finish up on the southern side of the Azora with his tefillah in the Shara Mayim, and now he would travel, after he's allowed to go through the Azora, over to the northern side, and that's where the Lishkas Beis Havtinus is. And then, after he learned and studied the Avodas HaKtores, then on a daily basis, during these 7 days of Prisha, Asi Lebeis HaMikdash, the Avad Avoda Kuli Yoma, he would do the Avoda of the entire day. Lebahadi Panya, when it came close to Shkia Sachama at night, is Madu Ale. Madu means Mazu Ale. The Dalit in Aramaic replaces the Zion, and they did the Hazah. Now, Rabbi Akiva's Shita is that once you do the Hazah on a tar, he becomes Tameh, and therefore he's got to go into the Beis HaTfilah a second time. V'hadar azil l'darom v'tavil v'nayich. Now, he goes back to the darom, correct? Go over this one more time. The Lishkas Beis Havtinus is in the darom, it's in the tzafon, and the Lishkas Farhedrin is in the darom. So now he went from darom to tzafon, and now he goes back to darom, which means he goes back and he does his second tefillah at the end of the day, and he goes to retire for the night next door in the Lishkas Farhedrin. And all this is under the assumption that it was the Lishkas Farhedrin that was in the south, immediately contiguous to the Shar Beis Hamayim, so that immediately after he woke up and he defecated, he would go into the Shar Beis Hamayim for tefillah, and now he can enter the Azara. He would travel north, walk towards the Lishkas Beis Havtinus to learn how to do the Kores. Then he would go into the Beis HaMikdash, and he would end his day after the Hazah with a Tefillah back on the southern side in the Sharamayim, and then retire next door to the Sharamayim in the Lishkas HaFarhedrin. The Amrit, if you're going to say the opposite, says Rav Papa, that Farhedrin, Lishkas Farhedrin, is in the Tzafon, which would mean that the Lishkas Havtinus is in the Darom, is Makdim Koyu Mesech Raglov, the Azal Darom, V'Tavel, V'Gomar Chafina. Now you're going to tell me that he wakes up in the morning in the north. He's not allowed to enter into the Azara because he just defecated. He needs a tefillah. And if he's in the north, he's got to go all the way to the south, because as we saw in the Mishnah, the Shar Hamayim is in the south. He's got to go all the way around the Azara. And then, once he goes to the south and he does his tefillah, then the Lishkas Beis Havtinus is in the south, and that's how he's going to learn how to do the Ketores. Then Asil Beis Hamikdash, Yomi Avoda Kuli Yoma, Lahadi Panya, Madi Ale, v'hodar ozil lidarom vitavil. Uboy meheder umezel et safon umenach. If you're going to identify the location of the Farhedrin in the north, he's going to have to go all the way back to the north, and he's going to then go into his Lishkas Farhedrin and retire for the night. Should we be imposing such a burden on the Kohen Gadol that if the Lishkas Farhedrin is in the north, after he wakes up, he's going to have to make the whole circuitous route, the walk around the entire Azara, in order to get to the mikvah, which is in the south, in the Sharamayim. And he's not allowed to enter into the Azara because he has to have the Tevilah first. And an amazing piece of Gemara, the Gemara rejects this. Allah alone. Why are you telling me that you don't want to be Mashiach the Kohen Gadol? I'd rather make it harder for the Kohen Gadol. For one of two reasons. Reason number one is to eat stokehu. There were candidates for the position of the Kohen Gadol that would stoke him. We don't want them because they're going to mess up the entire avodah of the Torres. So how do we discourage them from presenting their candidacy for this great job of being the Kohen Gadol? We're going to tell them, you know what? It's not worth it. It's a big hassle. It's a real tircha. A second reason why we want to make it hard for the Kohen Gadol having to walk all the way around the Azara is shalot tazuach daito alav. A Kohen Gadol might get so pumped up with himself, thinking, "Oh, I'm the great vehicle of kapara," and that would be a feeling of gaiva, and we want to get rid of that. So we say, be humble. Walk all the way around the Azara. I'm going to prove this to you. Why did they set up these two chambers, right one next to the other? Why is it that the Lishkas HaFarhedrin, where the Kohen retired for the night, and the Lishkas Beis Avtinus, where the Kohen would study and learn how to do the Torah, were on different ends of the Azara, one on the north, one on the south? Why didn't they put them contiguous, one to the other? Inami, I would even ask you further. Tiski le bechada. Why couldn't it be enough to have one lishka that would serve two functions? He would sleep there at night. Let's say in the back of the Lishkas Beis Avtinus, they would set up a chamber for the sleeping purposes of the Kohen Gadol, and he doesn't have to lift a finger. He's right there. Apparently, we want him to do a little extra effort and walk around, not for the exercise of it, but in order lafuke that the tzdukim should not really be desiring this position, or alternatively, kidei shalo tazuach daito ol. The Achronim here have a real problem with this Gemara of tiske le bechada, that there could be one chamber for both. Where did I see this? Just one second. It's the Siach Yitzchak. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, we don't have the time for this, but the Siach Yitzchak points out that here it is. How can the Gemara have a possibility raised about that there's one lishka? The Farhedrin, where he slept, had to be b'chol. It could not be sanctified with Kedushas Azor. You're not allowed to sleep in the Azor. The Lishkas Beis Avtinus had to be b'kodesh, and the reason for that is because alaktores leheoseis b'makom kadosh. We're not allowed to prepare and manufacture the Torres outside of the Kedushas Hazorah. So how could it possibly be that we combine these two into one? So the Siach Yitzchak orchestrates it in such a way that the Torres would be prepared on one side of the lishka, which is opened up into the azara. It has kedusha azara, and the kohen would sleep on the opposite side of this lishka, which was opened up to the outer part beyond the azara. Amrulo, the ziknei kohenim say, Ishay kohen gadol, my master, the kohen gadol, anu shluchei bezdin, the ata shluchenu, you are our shliach. Lema tevi tuvta, the Rav Huna berei Rav Yeshua, the Rav Huna berei Rav Yeshua, hani kani. Those kohanim who do the avoda, the makar the korban, shluchei derachmananin. It's got to be that they are shluchim of the Ribono Shalom. Amrit shluchei didaninu. We have a principle in shlichus that which you yourself cannot do, you can't send a shliach. Now, the Yisrael cannot come in and do the avodah of the korban. How can he possibly, therefore, appoint the kohen as his shliach? What the mishalech can't do, the shliach can't do on his behalf. And that logic compels Rav Huna to the conclusion that the kohenim are shluchei rachmana.